And this is Detroit Today on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. Good morning, I'm Craig Foley. Very glad you could be with us on this Friday. And again, live music from Rodriguez coming up at the bottom of the hour. But before that, our guest is Peter Markus. He's an author, and his latest novel, the first novel actually, is Bob or Man on Boat. And Peter, welcome to Detroit Today.
Thanks for having me.
And, you know, obviously you are a local. You've grew up in this area, downriver, I believe, correct?
I grew up in Trenton.
And that connection to the river shows up just about in every facet of this book, and it's interesting the way that you've decided to sort of tell this family tale through the eyes of people fishing in a lot of ways, and what that sort of brings. How did you come up with the idea?
I'm a fisherman. It's an activity that brings me great pleasure, and when I go to the page, I try to reenact that sense of pleasure. So it just makes perfect sense that I write about the river. I am the river. You know, I am the fish that I pull out of the river. There's that deep connection between me and that sense of place, and out of that place, a situation always arises. And it's usually dramatic.
But it suggests to me that this is beyond an activity.
It's an obsession. I mean, writers have to locate their obsessions, and hopefully those obsessions are charged with meaning. And for me, that place, the river itself, is a place that I return to. Physically, I go there. Spiritually, I go there. And for literary solace and inspiration, I always return to the river.
Well, do you think that this concept, and for people who are really into this kind of thing, and it's tough to sometimes put those feelings into words. Watching, a Bassmasters Championship on television, they may talk about it, but they don't have a way to put it into words. Is it difficult to, I guess, put down exactly what you're going through when you're out there?
Yeah, I think the fishing that I'm talking about is a little bit different than the Bassmasters.
Obviously, I know it. That's what I'm saying, though. But they have that same connection to what they're doing. They don't do that because they don't like it.
I think if I was a Bassmaster, I probably wouldn't be a writer, really. I mean, because I'm trying to, when I tell these stories of the river and the people who fish on the river, and two young boys who constantly go down to the river to make their peace with their sense of place in the world, it's really going on sort of a pilgrimage where it's not just about catching fish. It's about kind of finding yourself in this very mysterious place that the river is.
I want to talk a little bit about the style of the book, in that it is written sometimes in poetry, sometimes in prose. It's all over the place, really, in a lot of ways. It seems as if you had a whole lot of disconnected thoughts that you then found a way to string together, and it works. How did you approach this? When you first thought about it, were you going to write a standard novel, or did it always, was it always going to come out in these smaller sort of vignettes?
Yeah, I think I'm incapable of telling a traditional story in that kind of conventional way. Maybe it's the way my mind works. I think language itself is very fractured. The world is very fractured, and I think that sense of small pieces that are somehow strung together just seemed to be the natural and organic way that this book kind of took its shape. But I didn't have any intention really to just kind of create this series of vignettes. They just kind of came out that way. Maybe it's my short attention span. As a reader, I know I like books that have a lot of white space and short sentences, and that was naturally the form that this book just took.
I have to ask if that gives you any trouble with publishers at any given time, if they're trying to understand what you're trying to do.
I've had those situations when I was living in New York one summer, being called into I won't name the house, to tell me why they weren't going to publish this particular book of stories because they wouldn't know what to call it. And I don't really care about calling what I do anything. I mean, people have talked about this book as being one long poem. I've been rejected from some of my other books because it didn't seem like a novel in the conventional sense. It seemed like an epic poem. that does not bother me at all. I know that if you do the good work, eventually you'll find a publisher for it, and I've had some good success with the 3 books that I've published so far.
Our guest is Peter Markus. His first novel is Bob, or Man on Boat, and one of the things that this book lends itself to, though, is some reading. Is there a section that you wouldn't mind sharing with us?
Sure.
And to give folks a flavor of what we've got going on here.
Sure.
Again, this is Peter Markus on Detroit Today.
In a boat on a river lived a man, Bob. Bob fished. It's what Bob did all the time. Fish and fish. Sometimes Bob ate the fish, but most of the time what Bob did with the fish was Bob sold the fish. It's how Bob lived. A boat, a river, fish, a man, Bob. Look at Bob's hands. His knuckles are rivers. The skin on Bob's hands, fish scale covered, they look like they've been dipped in stars.
Again, it's Peter Markus reading from his novel Bob, or Man on Boat. And it almost flows. You can almost see the sort of small ripples and waves in the way that this is written. Was that a conscious act?
Nothing's conscious for me, Greg, but the book does kind of float. You know, or at least people have told me that the movement itself is like, you know, just kind of a river moving, and that pleases me, that I could maybe replicate what it is like to be out on the river.
And I think this is an important book for a lot of folks that maybe have, you know, a significant other that likes to spend a lot of time in the water and they maybe don't understand. Do you think this will help in that relationship in a few ways?
You know, there are people always drawn to the river as a way of escaping, whether or not they're escaping, you know, their jobs or their families, and certainly the characters in this book go to the river in a way that doesn't always please their loved ones. So maybe that this book would help them make sense of people like Bob.
Well, what's interesting about it too is that, you know, some of the people in the book don't understand it, but then they grow to understand it and be that same way themselves, following that example of the generation before.
Yeah, the river kind of repeats itself, even though you can't step into the same river twice.
Peter Markus, again, author of Bob, or Man on Boat. It is available where? Can it just about anywhere?
Pretty much everywhere.
Very good. And it's Dzanc Books is the publisher, and you can go to dzancbooks.org to find a copy. Again, it's Bob, or Man on Boat by Peter Markus. Thanks for joining us here.
Thanks for having me, Greg. Thank you.
Absolutely. And this is WDET, FM 101.9, Detroit.